Hey guys, welcome back to How's It Doing Garage. So today we're back on the Ford F250 Cummins swap. Still waiting for some parts, but we got some things that we can do for now. We got the new throttle linkage in the mail because, like I said before, this was all missing. So we got that, and I've got it put on. We're still waiting for the crankshaft seal to come in. The oil pan gasket, a couple other little things, but I'm gonna go ahead today and just make some ground straps and make the battery cable from the starter to the battery and just rough one end in because we don't have the batteries in it right now. But yeah, we'll do that and then see how far we make it today. But I was gonna do a little how-to on how I make my battery cables. Now there's some different ways to do this. Sometimes people will get crimping tool, which is what I have for making cables, and then some people will have the little tool where you put the cable in there and then you smack it with a hammer and it squishes it. I don't have one of them. It's too violent for me, so I use the crimping method. It seems to work best for me. But since how this is diesel truck, the starters on diesel trucks require a ton of amps to roll that big turd over, so you run big double-aught gauge battery cables on these trucks, the grounds, and then even the battery cable that feeds the starter. You want to make sure that they're the same size. But so what you'll do is, I've just got a couple little drops of battery cable here. You'll take your lug and then kind of map out how far back you need to strip the sheathing off, and then just take your knife, strip your sheathing off whatever way you want. You want to try not to nick any of the wires in there, because the more wires the nick, the less amps this thing's gonna hold. So let me get my camera put up somewhere and then we'll start making these cables. So what I do is I just take these cable cutters here and I'll just come back the distance I need, and then you kind of feel when you hit the copper, when you get all the way through the sheathing, and then it just pops off. Boop. Then you just make sure you get your lug on there all the way. Sometimes you'll lose a couple wires in this process if you got a good enough connection. And we got two little hairs kind of sticking out of there. It's not a huge deal. You don't want to be lobbing off a couple hundred strands or anything, but a couple of them ain't a big deal. So you just get your lug on there all the way, and then grab your crimping tool or your whatever your tool you're going to use to crimp them. This tool, I just picked this up off of Amazon. It was fairly cheap. As much battery cables I crimp, I don't really use this a ton, so I didn't figure spending hundreds of dollars on a super expensive tool. But you basically just pick the little anvils for the size lug you're crimping, stick them in here, stick your lug in there, and then just tighten it up a little bit. What I always like to do once I get it crimped good is I'll loosen this up a little bit, turn it 80 degrees or 90 degrees, and then just crimp it one more time just to make sure you get a good crimp on it. Now if you were you see now it's crimped pretty good. All them wires are held in there real tight, so they're all going to be in there pretty sound. If you have too big of a lug, like say you have single gauge wire and you got like a lug that's too big and you're trying to crimp it and it's just not holding it tight, you really can't do that, because the wire's not going to produce the current that it's supposed to, and it's going to get hot, and it's going to affect the performance of your electrical system. So you really got to make sure that you get everything's tight. Your connections are all tight, because if you get any kind of looseness or anything, they're not going to conduct the electricity that they're supposed to. So you really got to make sure that you're using 2-watt lugs with 2-watt cable, single-out lugs, single-out cable, or whatever. And then I always try to buy UL listed lugs too, which is Under Rogers Laboratory. They make sure that they're built to a certain specification, so you're not getting some crappy, who knows what material it's made out of lug that's not to specification, so it's a goofy size or whatever. So I always just make sure that I buy decent quality lugs, so that way you're getting a copper lug that's 5/16 hole for a 2-aught cable, and not some weird non-denominational measurement or whatever. So yeah, so I'm gonna crimp one end on these, go over to the truck and map out how long we need these, and then cut it and crimp the other end on. As far as shrink wrap, whenever I buy shrink wrap, I like to get nice stuff with the glue in it, get a real weather-free connection. You really don't want moisture getting in your cables. I buy them a big old roll, because you can get it. You can get it with little pieces, but I just get it in a roll and trim it. Normally you'd heat shrink with a heat gun. My heat gun's actually busted right now. And then every time you get a busted tool, it's kind of like windshield wipers on your car. You only remember it's busted when you're trying to use it. So when you're at the store, you're never like, oh man, I need to get that. So I only remember my heat gun's busted when I need to use my heat gun. You see the glue. So get this on there real quick. You see the glue seeping out of there? That's a pretty good connection there. It's pretty solid. Alright, so I've got these battery cables and ground cables half made and half installed. So the ground cable goes from the motor mount to the frame. Then we got some copper NSCs in there. And then I just use a neoprene clamp to hold the battery cable that goes to the starter. And then we did a ground cable from the alternator to the battery. It's going to go here. And then this battery cable is going to go to the battery here. And then it's got 2 batteries. So then I've made one side of this battery cable that's going to go from here through the core support over to this other battery. And then I made one more ground clamp that's going to go from this side of the motor to the battery. And then I've also made another ground that goes from the motor mount to the frame. So that way there's 2 grounds, one on each side of the engine, and then one on each for each battery. So the batteries will ground through the engine, and then you always want to have a ground on your alternator, so your alternator don't have to work as hard, blah blah blah. So when I get the core support put back in here, and then we'll terminate the battery cable ends and finish all that battery portion of the wiring system. Alright guys, so some of my parts came in. My new seal for my front timing cover is here. I've got it put in the timing cover already. I've got the installation sleeve on here. I've got a light coating. I like to use gasoline safe RTV on the gasket that tack up real good, and then I'm gonna put the cover on. There's no sealing. I don't put the RTV on here to seal. I just kind of like a little tack situation. I'll hold the gasket on there while I put it on there, and then the gasket will do the main sealing. So I've got a little assembly lube around the crank so this seal slides on there without too much issue. Boop. I've made a mess. So next I gotta put this balancer back on, which I marked it with this little white dot. So it slides on here, bloop. And then I'm gonna get some bolts. And yeah, we did away with the clutch fan mount. We're gonna do 2 electric fans on here because we don't have enough room for the mechanical fan anyway. So we're gonna do 2 electrics. And yeah. Actually, I might put this balancer on after we get the oil pan back on, because it's not in the way, but it's kind of like blocking the way a little. So anyway, so one of the things we're doing is, so we got rid of the mechanical fan and we're going with 2 electric fans. So I got this electric fan shroud set up from Summit. Just 2 derail 17-inch fans. I think this is 4200 CFMs. These fans will move together. They're 2-speed high and low fans. So I have a 2-speed controller coming also. So you just hook, you know, ground, and then you got like the brown is low and the gray is high speed. So you can hook them up where if you got your air conditioning on, you want to run them on low speed, get some light airflow over the condenser. And then if the, you know, obviously it's getting temp wise is getting hot, you wanted to bump it up. But I just mounted it, little brackets, mounted it to the factory mount on the radiator where the fan shroud would go. And yeah, it was pretty simple to install, and this came all complete just like this right out of the box. I think it was like $400 for this whole setup. So it should work out pretty good. All right, guys. So we made, almost tripped. We made a lot of progress, me and Trey, and slight little tiny bit of Aaron. So we got, so you know, we got the timing cover on. I got the balancer back on. I've got the RPM pickup thingy majobber on here. It's not obviously set. We got the oil pump back on, full of oil. We got the AC pump on. It's bolted in there. We've got some temporary wiring going from the fuel shutoff solenoid over to the battery. We have a battery. I've terminated the starter wire over here. I've terminated the ground to the battery from the alternator. I mean, obviously the alternator's not even hooked up or anything like that, but I've done the fuel line, which was super simple. This thing was a diesel, so it wasn't too hard. And we've got all the grounds tight, everything, starters, blah, blah, blah. So we should be able to start it. We don't have a starter wire down to the starter yet, but we should be able to fire this thing up. So I'm going to just jimmy rig the starter with a screwdriver real quick, and then it should fire up. Maybe.
Fingers crossed.
Really? So it runs. Obviously, we still have a ton to do with some wiring and all that to get it. Oh, it's the vacuum. To get it finished. He's making a weird hissing noise. But, yeah, she's running. Sounds good. It's not making any weird noises, which is always, you know, a scare when you're doing this kind of stuff. But, yeah, so we're going to keep plugging along. We'll get the core support on here. And get all the, you know, get more of this stuff buttoned up, and yeah, hopefully take it for a test drive by the end of the week. So that's gonna do it for today's episode of the Ford build. It's running good. It's holding good oil pressure. It's currently overheating because there's no radiator in it, but no, I'm kidding. No, so it's running good. I gotta wait for a couple little other parts to come in, but we're gonna continue on doing some other stuff in the next video, probably exhaust and stuff like that. But thanks for watching, and leave us a comment down below what you think of the Ford so far. We'll catch you on the next video.